Hello, everyone. Welcome to NiCHE Conversations. We are going to be talking about winter today and the way that we think about winter in relation to Canada, the Canadian past, and the Canadian identity, and how historians have changed the way that they think about weather and cover weather in winter through time. And we're going to be joined by Tina Adcock, who was a longtime NiCHE executive member as well as editor. And Tina did a lot while she was on the editorial board for us. And one of these things was putting together our first found series, which was called A Cold Kingdom. And that's what we're going to be revisiting today. Tina is here, so I'm going to invite her. Yay! Hello, Tina.
Hi, Jessica. How's it going?
Good. It's so good to see you.
I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see your face. Tina is a longtime colleague and friend of mine, and it's good to have her back here at NiCHE for a couple minutes to talk about winter. So I'm Jessica DeWitt. I'm one of the editors here at the Network in Canadian History and Environment, and we're joined today by Tina Adcock. Do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure, yeah. I'm an assistant professor of history at Simon Fraser University in Greater Vancouver, Canada. I research and teach about Canadian and environmental history with a specific focus on the Arctic, the 20th century Arctic and subarctic.
Yes. Yes, and as I was rambling about a little bit before you came on, you were a longtime NiCHE executive member and an editor for us. And we're going to be revisiting one of your posts, one of your very popular posts back from 2016. You published it. It was called A Cold Kingdom. And it was a post that also introduced the idea of a found series to us. So you kind of sifted through all of our prior blog posts and found those things that were related to winter and brought them forward. And I know it's a concept that we've replicated maybe once, but we talk about all the time how we should do more of them. So I thought we'd start off this conversation by talking about what was the impetus behind this first post, A Cold Kingdom, in 2016. Why did you write it?
Yeah, for sure. And this is a great question. And as I was reflecting on this, I was like, I actually can't remember like what led to the inception of this found series. So yeah, I mean, I think it really is about as straightforward as you said in your own telling of the story. You know, I had noticed that there was this theme, this developing thread, if you will, of sort of cold histories of the cold and of experiences in the cold, and particularly sort of histories of winter. Just running through a number of independent posts we'd published lately, because this was back when NiCHE was still kind of operating much more on the kind of single author post rather than the kind of series or groups of posts. So, and I think probably part of it was just, you know, my own background, both my professional and my personal background, of course. You know, I research Northern Canada, so I think I'm just automatically kind of more conscious of and drawn to kind of experiences of cold and sort of winter. And then, of course, my own personal background too. So I grew up in Edmonton, where, you know, as you know, Jessica, you live on the prairies too. It's a very intense experience of winter, and you know, I spent 21 years in Edmonton, and it really does stay with you. You know, it's the winter by which I measure all other experiences of winter since. So I think I'm just sort of intrinsically interested in it. And then I'm not sure what post was the tipping point, but at some point I clearly was like, yeah, like, let's actually put this together as a series. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah. And I think you mentioned in the post that while we were publishing all these posts on winter, when it comes to like monographs or journal articles, there was more that was talking about Canada in relation to warmer weather. And maybe this is something that we should check, maybe think about more critically, perhaps push forward more stories of winter. So I was wondering if like you could talk about maybe if you've witnessed any changes in the way that Canadian history deals with winter since you published this post 8 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I probably my comments are going to kind of be a little bit limited to mainly how environmental
Mhm.
historians have dealt
Yes.
with winter. Just because of our I was going to say our readers, our watchers, our listeners
Yes.
and viewers. So I mean, the thing to say is it's grown, which is great. Like there's
Mhm.
more on the topic of winter in Canadian history than there was 8 years ago. And I'd say, like, as with any topic of scholarly interest, you see some change in how it's been talked about, but also some
Mhm.
continuity. So I wanted to flag in the sort of change category, there's been some terrific new research into the material and the cultural histories of winter in the early modern era.
Mhm.
So prior to the 19th and
Yes.
20th century, which is fabulous, especially given the increased hegemony of 20th century history
Yes.
in our profession. So it's great to see that kind of those earlier experiences.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking, and the great thing is that most of this is transnational too. I mean, it takes in sort of vast early America, so it takes in the northeastern United States as well as eastern and northeastern Canada. So I'm thinking here, for example, of Thomas Wickman's Snowshoe Country. This sort of looks at Indigenous and colonial experiences of winter in partly in what's today Nova Scotia and New Brunswick.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of Sam White's book, A Cold Welcome, which is focused sort of even earlier in the 16th and 17th
Yeah.
centuries, and it really focuses on not just winter, but on seasonal experiences in the Little Ice Age and how this affected the resettlement of what's currently Canada and the United States. So that's really interesting as well. And then Anya Zilberman's A Temperate Empire, which is kind of more of an intellectual history. It looks at early settlers' attempts to understand and modify local climates in New England and Nova Scotia. So there's,
Mhm.
histories of kind of climate and kind of culture sort of interwoven there. So that's one area of change. In terms of continuity, so back in my post of Cold Kingdom, I identified mobility as a really
Yes.
strong theme in this area of scholarship, and that has definitely been sustained over time. Like it might be the strongest thread in sort of histories of winter. So, and you really see this in Blake Butler and Ben Bradley's new fabulous edited series for the Otter. I have to thank you,
Mhm.
Jessica, because this gave me the impetus to actually go and like read the whole series yesterday. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. I'm enjoying
Yeah.
this so much. But yeah, you really clearly see this theme of mobility in 2024 scholarship as well as
Mhm.
the scholarship from 10 years ago, 10-ish years ago. So you see how, how studies show that like wintry conditions could impede the movement of people, the movement of animals, the movement of goods. So kind of ice jammed canals and, snow filled roads and things like that. But you also see how winter could facilitate mobility, right? So it impeded mobility, but it could also
Mhm.
facilitate mobility. And, here I think the case study of snow roads in 19th century Canada by Jack Little and Eric Robinson is sort of particularly to the point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention kind of probably my favorite new history of winter, which is in dissertation form as of now. It's Blake Butler's 2023 dissertation called Canada's Evergreen Playground, A
Mhm.
History of Snow in Vancouver. It is openly accessible online if you're interested
Yep.
in reading it. It's a fabulous read. It's about the history of snow in Vancouver and the Southern Coast Mountains, so the North Shore Mountains, and all the way up to Whistler. And it's just great. Like it's a multifaceted study of winter through the lens of snow and its material and cultural ramifications. So it like looks at everything from like snow science to like snow clearing on urban streets to alpine activities and things like
Mhm.
that, to hydroelectricity. So it's just really like this super rich study. But one thing I really like that Blake does conceptually is he frames the study of snow as distinct from the study of winter, which I think is like a really important point that's worth
Yeah.
thinking about further, right? Because snow is actually a multi-seasonal affair in
Mhm.
Canada, right? Especially
Mhm.
in northern Canada, but like living in Edmonton, I can
Yes.
say I have experienced snow in Edmonton every month but July, I
Yes.
think. Or there's like one month in the year that like I never had snow in Edmonton, but
Mhm.
every other month in Edmonton I have seen snow. And Blake also makes the point that snow products like meltwater affect the lives of Canadians year round,
Mhm.
right? They have effects on Canadians' lives in summer through the tap water we drink, right? And through the hydroelectricity that powers our homes in BC. So I think what I took away from that, one of the many things I took away from Blake's dissertation, is that we also need more histories of snow,
Yeah.
particularly in Canada, as well as histories of winter. And kind of in a broader context, we see lots of histories of ice and snow, but I feel like we could really kind of drill down on that sort of topic in Canada. I think that could be really cool. Yeah.
Ooh, I love that. And I love
Yeah.
that you and Blake speak to each other so much. And I know that he is always mentioning your work and is always mentioning A Cold Kingdom. Like he put it into his like second recommendation on the crash course in
I
environmental history
know.
that
I
Alan
know.
just put together. So it's nice that Blake is a newer scholar who is now an editor for us, but that your work has spoken to each other through generations and like years, and that's awesome. Um, and yeah, I remember when I was talking to Bart Elmore, not Bart Elmore. Ugh, I can't talk. Bart Pushaw. I was talking to Bart Elmore in the email earlier. Bart Pushaw about the visual cultures of the Circumpolar North series, and we were talking about how it's sometimes easier for people to understand how environment affects things in the north because it's so in your face. Like the extreme cold and stuff is so in your face that it creates a way of like opening the door to people understanding that just because it's extreme in the circumpolar region doesn't mean that weather and climate and what have you doesn't affect you elsewhere as well. Like you can take that thinking and kind of like apply it to everything, right?
Exactly. And I mean, this was the brilliance of doing a history of snow in Vancouver, because again, it's atypical there. So you can almost see it more clearly than you
Mm-hmm.
can in other parts in Canada where it just fades into the background, right? Like
Yeah,
it's just so quotidian. It's such a part of normal experience that it's like you almost can't see it because it's everywhere.
yeah.
So that was what I really loved about, about that like sort of geographical approach, was that like
Mm-hmm.
because it's not usual, or well, because it's not an everyday affair in Vancouver, you can see it as an
Yes.
object of study more clearly. And so I think that that gets back to the point that you were making as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of like when you live somewhere like Saskatoon or something, there's a lot of like waiting for summer for everything. And
Oh yeah,
it's such a
yeah,
cultural thing. It's like, life doesn't stand still just because it's cold. Like we need to like, yeah. It's
I
just like
know.
there's like some intersections of just broader cultural themes, cultural factors in Canada that affecting scholarship and the way we think of what is worthy of thinking about and what is not. And yeah, anyways, it's good stuff. So,
Yeah,
um, so this winter, I personally have noticed, and I've noticed other people being a bit, I think, a lot of like really getting hit hard by some emotional like climate anxiety and um, even on March 1st, Alan McEachern, a fellow environmental historian, tweeted out that winter is history. Um, and I just wondered if you had any thoughts about how climate change is changing our relationship to winter as people who live in Canada, as well as our relationship to our past notions of what winter should be and was. Yeah.
yeah. This is a fabulous question. I actually like had to dig out where Alan said this. I was like, oh, it's probably on X, which
Yeah.
I don't really frequent
Yes.
anymore. So
Yeah.
sure enough, that's where it was. Yeah, it's a great question. And I have a couple of different kind of responses to this.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say definitely like first off, there's a very big element of what you say, sort of climate anxiety, solastalgia to this
Mm-hmm.
conversation. And for those who might not have heard this term before, I think it was coined in like 2005, and essentially it refers to kind of grief caused by environmental change,
Mm-hmm.
often global warming slash climate change, but also just kind of environmental change more generally over time. So of
Yeah.
course with nostalgia, which is kind of like one of its root words, like there is a sense of
Yeah.
loss, right? There is a sense of something that we used to have that we have no longer. And this is very real, right? I mean, you can look at really any number of examples in terms of how Canadians' physical relationship with winter is changing. So, you think about Colin Coates's article about kind of, curling outside and
Mm-hmm.
outdoor rinks, or Rebecca Bossart's post about ice skating outside on ponds and things like that. I mean, that's just getting less and less common
Yeah.
because we're not getting those cold snaps anymore. The ice is not as stable. I mean, people still go out on the ice. You see this in Metro Vancouver too during cold snaps.
Yeah.
Like the cities are like, no, don't do that. And everyone's like, yeah, I'm going to Instagram myself skating around the
Mm-hmm.
ice, pick up hockey. Yeah. So, there's a sense that we won't have as easy or ready or usual access to these kind of cold weather wintry experiences anymore. Of course, this is also coupled with an increased sense of uncertainty, right? So it's not just that
Yes.
winter is disappearing, it's that it's coming and going in really random events and really extreme ways. So of course there's going to be more extreme but
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously more random weather and climate events associated with winter in the coming years, right? There's going to be more ice storms. There's going to be more extreme cold snaps.
Yeah.
We in Metro Vancouver, we had a really prolonged period of sub-zero temperatures back in December, and it killed a bunch of my plants. So we're
Yeah.
always being told, oh, we have to like select plants now with attentiveness to drought conditions and kind of, low watering regimes.
Mm-hmm.
But cold kills plants too in Metro Vancouver. Increasingly, we're just getting these like intense winter events too. So, there's sort of a general sense of loss, but also a kind of more specific sense of kind of uncertainty and the anxiety that comes with this like increased feeling that we lack control, that like the ways we used to understand and live through
Yes.
and know winter are changing, and they're no longer they don't hold.
Mm-hmm.
The center doesn't hold anymore, right? And of course this is going to be very different for different people across the country, right? So everyone has their distinct experiences with winter. I'm Inuit living in Nunavut, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's a lot of discussion about how changing weather conditions changes ice regimes. So certain trails are no longer safe to
Yes.
travel, increased risk of falling through the ice when hunters are out hunting on snowmobiles and things like that. So I just want to kind of nod to that experience to just say that like it's also going to be different across the
Mm-hmm.
country, right? And I say this because actually, well, I'm going to get to this in a minute, but there's often this tendency to homogenize
Yes.
Canadian experiences of cold, to
Mm-hmm.
homogenize Canadian experiences of winter. And this is related
Mm-hmm.
to the place of cold in our national imagination and in our discourses of nationalism. So I guess maybe I'll just skip to that, because what I've kind of noticed reviewing the literature too is that quite a few historians have actually deliberately declined to talk about these kind of changes in a declensionist mode. Like they're not framing
Yeah.
it in terms of decline and degradation and things like that. They kind of just point to instead the fact that experiences of winter have always changed.
Mm-hmm.
They've always changed over time. Sam White makes the point that winters during the Little Ice Age were colder than anything we've experienced in our lifetimes, right? So change is,
Mm-hmm.
change is part of history. So there can be grief, but there can also just be this recognition that, nothing is constant, that everything changes. It doesn't always change in the same ways for the same reasons and, with the same kind of significance, but it is going to change, right? The
Yes.
material and the intellectual ramifications and trappings of these of seasons are going to change. So I was thinking, like, as our winters change,
Mm-hmm.
as our perceptions of ourselves as Canadians, as settler Canadians in particular, as inherently kind of cold weather people, as these perceptions of ourselves begin to shift, I wonder if this is actually going to open up room for other kinds of stories about winter in the past, for other kinds of histories of
Yeah.
winter. And I'm thinking particularly here, stories that are told by BIPOC people or centering BIPOC experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the big gap I noticed in,
Mm-hmm.
Blake and Ben's series.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is
Yeah.
something we've talked about at NiCHE more
Yeah.
generally, the
Yes.
absence of race and other than, non-white experiences in the
Mm-hmm.
past and voices in the presence, right? So, and various people have made this point, like Blair Stein most recently, this notion of Canadians as kind of a northern people, a cold climate
Yes.
people. I mean, this is based on historical racism. This is based on historical xenophobia. This is based on historical white supremacy, right? This is what is at the core of these beliefs. And I don't think people always realize that now, but they are, it's part of the secreted inheritance of these kind of discourses, right? So maybe if we kind of detach ourselves from, this notion that we are naturally inherently cold weather people, we can start telling other stories about winter in the past, and not just kind of stories that include, people that are not white, and hopefully stories that are like that have like a positive valence as well too, right? Because I think, I'm thinking about a story that Blake told in his dissertation that I've already shared in my social history of Canada class, which is just like one of the things that happened when it snowed in Metro Vancouver in the early 20th century is that white people formed snowballs and threw them at Chinese people. Like there was harassment via snowball in the street, right? Yeah. And this was a sort of very quotidian expression of racism, like a very quotidian microaggression that Chinese people expected when it snowed. And of course, this is tied up in the sort of larger phenomenon of anti-Asian racism in Vancouver at that time. And, those are important stories to tell, obviously, but we also need to tell other stories, particularly stories that kind of center the experiences of Black and Indigenous and people of color as well. So I guess I'm hopeful that, there is definitely grief, but there could also be, other kinds of value in having the climate force our hand, in having climate change force our hand, and having ourselves think of ourselves as, other than northern people. And this connects to like some really inchoate thoughts I've been having recently about how, the great unrecognized thing in Canadian history is the fact the fact that we are a southern nation in many ways, which is not to elide the experiences of people living in the north, but which is to say that, a lot of us claim Nordicity while spending the bulk of our lives in the south. So if you think about the cardinal directions that have been discussed in Canadian history, there's been a lot written about the north, there's been a lot written about the east, there's been a lot written about the west. There has been almost nothing written about the south, and there's a reason for that. And I think it goes back to what I'm saying about, Nordicity having such a central place in our imagination, and, having a kind of positive value in constructing notions of ourselves as a people. So, yeah, so I'm hopeful that maybe we can tell some different stories, as I've said like 4 times already.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, I think it's so, I like this rejection of fully declensionist thinking of this, and the fact that, nostalgia always is part myth making, always, and solastalgia is no different, right? It's partially a myth making cultural phenomenon, right? And I'm thinking of it in my own experience. So I've lived in Saskatoon for 12 years now, 12 and a half years. And I've absolutely seen a change in the climate in just this decade. Absolutely. But in many ways, the winter now resembles what I grew up with in northwestern Pennsylvania. So in ways, I am much more comfortable and feel more at home in the ways that winter is changing here. More snow, a bit wetter, milder temperatures, and so in some ways I feel more at home. And that's just because of my own touch points with what is winter and what should winter be. And so I feel both anxiety, but also sometimes I feel guilty for feeling more comfortable. And I think that's also something that people I hear people being expressed, like, I feel guilty that I'm excited that it's +5 in January, I feel a bit of guilt, in addition to, and happiness, right? And excitement in addition to anxiety. And I think kind of like being honest about this full spectrum of emotions that comes with all of this, and that, I'm sure that the winters of past generations also felt different. And there's also just the idea that when you're younger, like you remember your childhood in ways that skew the way that you understand the present. Anyways, it's all very complicated and lovely, and it's so fascinating.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate those ideas that you brought forth. Anyways, I suggest that everyone go back and read this piece by Tina, and then take a look at our current Winter in Canada series, which is fantastic.
Hmm.
And yeah, thanks for joining me today, Tina. This was lovely. It's good to see
Yeah,
you.
it's good to see you. Thanks for having me. It's great to join this institution that you've built on Instagram Live.
Thanks. Yeah, take care. Talk to you
Yeah,
soon.
you too. Take
Bye.
care, Jessica. Bye.